please welcome the Governor of the great state of Louisiana, John Bel Edwards.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, members of the legislature, Smoke, thank you, family and friends, my fellow Louisianans, and I want to thank Father Mark for that wonderful prayer and Corey for the national anthem, and for those young people from Gillis Long Youth Challenge who presented the colors today, did such a wonderful job. I stand before you today aware of the magnitude of the challenge that has brought us together. Today, we face the largest budget deficit in our state's history. Our work will not be easy, but I am optimistic that our love of this state and our responsibility to our citizens will anchor our actions. The last time that I stood here, I said that I hope and I expected to be back in this chamber so that we could work together to fix our state's problems in a lasting and bipartisan way, a way that is worthy of the people of Louisiana. Well, here we are, together in this chamber with a common mission and a critical purpose. We have a $940 million budget deficit that must be corrected by June 30th. And next year, we're facing a $2 billion budget deficit. It's time for fiscal responsibility in this state. No more smoke and no more mirrors. I'm asking everyone to shed partisan labels and blinders and work with me to repair the state that we all love. And my commitment to you is I'm going to do the same. I did not call you here to continue putting off the tough decisions. We've done that for too long. I've called you here because our present budget crisis requires that we take immediate and decisive action. As I see it, how you, how we respond to this call will determine the course of Louisiana's future. And as I said the last time I stood here, real leadership is required. Leadership that will be present, not absent. Leadership that will be involved, not detached. And I promise you this, I will roll up my sleeves to work with you, not from another state and not while pursuing some other position, but right here, working with you to fix these challenges. And I urge you to remember that behind every budget number are real Louisiana citizens, families, students, workers, and kids like Braden Wilson, who I talked about on Thursday night. As you may remember, Braden suffers from Lee's disease. He's been bedridden since birth. He's 9 years old now. Braden's mom is Cody, is with us today, and I'd ask Cody to please stand and be recognized. Thank you very much, Cody. I talk about Braden because his family is one of thousands at risk for losing the Now waiver that they rely upon to pay for care that is essential. The people of this state are demanding that we do what is right. Now, I am mindful as I address this chamber that we will not agree on every solution. There are some that will tell you that we merely have a spending problem, that simply tightening our belts will eliminate this historic deficit. But let me be very clear. We cannot just cut our way out of this crisis. And it simply isn't possible to always do more with less. Because if it were, one day you could do everything for nothing. And life doesn't work that way. Here are the facts. While my predecessor inherited a $1 billion surplus when he became governor, I've been left with a $1 billion deficit that we must resolve in the next 4 months, and a $2 billion deficit next fiscal year. Again, the largest budget deficit in the history of our state. We're $570 million short of the revenue we expected to bring in this year, due in part to the drop in oil prices and a slowdown in sales and corporate tax collections. In fact, we're paying out more in credits and refunds to corporations this year than we are collecting from them in taxes. For example, the amount of the industrial tax exemption is now greater than the homestead exemption that we give to families in Louisiana. We've lost our way. We've got to return to a sensible, balanced approach. Additionally, we have $370 million in commitments that we made that we don't have the money to pay for. The current budget failed to account for how many people would need access to public health care, how many students would qualify for TOPS, how many students would enroll in our public schools, and how many state inmates would be housed by our sheriffs, among many other failures. As you know, we've had budget deficits in Louisiana for 8 straight years. And rather than making the structural changes we needed, instead one-time funds were increasingly used to patch budget shortfalls. Today, all of that money is gone. Make-believe efficiencies, more and more tax giveaways, and privatization schemes that actually increase costs all further exacerbated the problem. Blunders of the past have led us to this day of reckoning. Now is the time to make the more difficult, right decisions instead of the easier or wrong ones that appease out-of-state special interests or serve a narrow political agenda. To do this, we need a balanced approach of strategic cuts and new revenue. Focusing on one without the other would be irresponsible, especially when the problem is so massive. And I want to stress to you how important it is that every moment of this 3.5-week session be spent fixing this historic crisis. That small window of time is all that we have to get it right. If left unresolved, we will face unimaginable catastrophic cuts to vital state services. Before I outline what's at stake, I want to quiet those critics who say I'm not proposing spending cuts. The plan I'm presenting to you includes at least $160 million in painful cuts, and I have taken unilateral action to exercise my constitutional authority with regard to cuts with an executive order that I signed earlier today. And I have further asked the Joint Legislative Committee on the Budget to make additional reductions. And now it's your turn. You have the ability to approve an additional roughly $30 million in cuts in the current year that I've proposed. And you should be mindful that whatever supplemental appropriation needs that we have, but we can't fund, at the end of the day, they will be cut as well. In fact, more than half of my proposal to fill our current fiscal year deficit does not require raising additional revenues. So I ask you, when someone comes to you and says we can cut our way out of this crisis, that we have a spending problem and not a revenue problem, that there are painless options that solve the problem, and then they point to studies that are 15 and 20 years old, you should demand specifics. Because this is what's at stake. With respect to health care, the Department of Health and Hospitals is already facing severe cuts because of how massive the budget problems have become. And without generating more revenue, those cuts will be catastrophic. Safety net hospitals across the state will close, leaving communities without health care options, and not just for the poor, but for everybody. Vital health care services would be gone, and while there are services we are constitutionally required to offer, The optional services at risk of being cut are really not optional to the many children, elderly, and disabled citizens who depend on them to survive. The new Opportunity Waiver Program, which provides much-needed help for families with developmental disabilities like Cody Wilson's, is under consideration for painful cuts and might be offered to far fewer people than need them. Funding for services such as hospice care and end-stage kidney dialysis would also be impacted. And when it comes to life and death issues, our discussion should be clear. We should fight like hell to protect those services for our citizens. On the positive side, we will lower health care costs in Louisiana by expanding the Medicaid program so that working families can have access to health care. Folks like Butch and Dawn Schwest from St. Mary Parish, they're also here with us today. Would Butch and Dawn stand up? Thank you very much for being here. Help me welcome them. Butch and his family have made a living as professional shrimpers for generations. After the BP oil spill devastated their business, they could no longer afford their health insurance. However, when they applied for Medicaid, they were told they didn't qualify because Louisiana had rejected the Medicaid expansion, which would have covered citizens like him. Now, Butch and Dawn, they're not asking for a handout. They're asking for one of life's most basic necessities, decent health care. Health care that our tax dollars are already paying for. Well, this is an opportunity to dramatically improve the health of our working poor while saving tax dollars, creating jobs, and investing in our workforce. Today, we pay 38% of the cost of providing care to the uninsured, but with the expansion, we will never have to pay more than 10% of that same cost. And those patients will then have greater access to primary care doctors and preventative care. It's a win-win for both health care and the budget, saving tens of millions of dollars in the first year alone, and it avoids cost increases going forward because the cost of doing nothing is simply too high. Payments we receive from the federal government to cover the costs that hospitals incur for providing health care services to the uninsured, known as DSH, are soon going to dry up. Those DSH dollars have to be replaced with 100% state general fund if we're going to continue to operate those hospitals, primarily our safety net hospitals. And without these payments, hospitals will begin closing. They're already seeing that happen in Alabama, in Georgia, and other states, especially in rural areas. So there's much at stake with respect to health care. As for education, higher education too is at risk for devastating cuts. Because the Revenue Estimating Conference identified an even greater deficit just last week, higher education will need to cut $42 million, which in itself is a historic cut to make this late in the fiscal year. On top of that, the Top Scholarship Fund is operating with a $28 million shortfall, a cost that will be absorbed by our already cash-strapped universities. And without additional revenue, higher education will be crushed with more than $200 million in cuts over the next 4 months. And that comes on the heels of the largest disinvestment in higher education in the nation over the last 8 years. If these cuts are allowed to proceed, universities and community and technical colleges simply will not be able to make payroll. Universities have informed me that campuses will begin closing as soon as May 1st, and their accreditation is threatened. If you have any doubt about the impact of higher education research facilities and how they can be a force for good, right here in Louisiana, look no further than the LSU physicist who just grabbed international headlines at the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, and I think that's why they call it LIGO, in Livingston Parish. LSU researchers at LIGO recorded for the first time ever the sound of two black holes colliding 1 billion light years away, demonstrating Einstein's theory of relativity and proving that black holes exist. I'm honored to say that the head of LIGO Observatory, LSU physics professors Joe Giammi and also Professor Gabriela Gonzalez, who leads the 15-nation LIGO science collaboration, are here with us in the balcony. And please stand and be recognized. And if you all would help me recognize those individuals. Thank you, professors. But what does it mean for our students? If our institutions are forced to close their doors, students will not be able to complete their courses for the semester, leaving them with a grade of incomplete, and summer schools would have to be canceled across the state also. This is what the leaders of our higher education systems and institutions are telling me. This will happen if we do not act. And quite simply put, I refuse to fail our children in that way. And you should know that while students won't be billed for the shortage of TOP funds this semester, the future of TOPS, a program that I have always fought tooth and nail to protect and believe in today, that program is at risk, and therefore so is the future for our children. Much like the dream of Kyle Yipia, whose family we welcome here this afternoon. Kyle, please stand up with your family. Kyle is a high school senior at C.E. Byrd in Shreveport. He's got boundless dreams and an incredible work ethic. Between playing football and maintaining a 4.5 grade point average. I told him earlier, I didn't know you could get more than a 4.0, but he's got a 4.5. Kyle eagerly awaits his freshman year at Louisiana Tech next fall to study chemical engineering. The last thing on his mind today should be wondering and worrying why the tuition award he worked so hard for might slip away because we can't summon the courage to fix the problem. And it's unacceptable that parents like Kyle's parents, who've encouraged their kids to work hard and achieve their goals, to be suddenly struck with the paralyzing fear of figuring out how to replace a scholarship and pay for tuition for their child. Well, I've got an idea. Let's honor Kyle's hard work with some hard work of our own. That's what we need to do. So I have put forth a plan that stabilizes our budget and protects people like Kyle and Braden Wilson and the Schwest family. This plan doesn't penalize one group or another, but it simply asks all of us to share in this sacrifice of stabilizing our budget so we can strengthen our state and so that all of us too can share in the prosperity that will follow. And as I mentioned before, my plan includes significant spending cuts to the tune of more than $160 million in the current year. In addition to that, we'll also have a hiring freeze across state government, and we will reduce state contracts. I also propose to use $128 million from the Rainy Day Fund and $200 million in non-coastal BP payments to the state to reduce the current year deficit. My proposals include further reducing tax credits, suspending corporate tax deductions, and adding 1 penny of sales tax to our state's 4-cent sales tax. I am proposing this penny as a bridge that will give us time to stabilize and restructure our state's tax code. And when that restructuring is complete, the penny of sales tax will be removed. And as part of the restructuring, I am also proposing an increase in alcohol and cigarette taxes. Now, I've heard the critics say that I've changed my tune on raising taxes. My response is this: in a crisis when the facts change as dramatically as the facts surrounding our budget have changed, so must the solutions change. That is called responsible leadership. You should remember, the first time a budget deficit was recognized was on November the 16th of 2015, a week before I was elected. Since then, the number's grown from $487 million in the current year to a staggering $940 million today. And further, that $487 million was supposedly fixed in November with a comprehensive solution proposed by my predecessor that proved to neither be comprehensive nor a solution. Yesterday, Jay Darden, my Commissioner of Administration, presented an honest and balanced budget for next year with only the revenue recognized by the Revenue Estimating Conference on Wednesday. It shows that the state is $2 billion short in state general funds needed to simply provide the same level of basic and essential services being provided this year. And I want to reiterate, because I know he said it yesterday, this is not the budget that I want to sign into law, and this is not a budget that honors our most sacred obligations to the people of Louisiana. And now is the time, the only time, to fix it. This is not the challenge I imagined I would face one month after becoming your governor. But this is the crisis before us, and we must solve it. As President Eisenhower, by the way, another West Point graduate, he said this in preparing for battle: I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. So if you insist on saying that I never said I would raise taxes, that I'm going back on my word, that's fine. Say it. Get it out of your system. And then come back and work with me to fix the problem facing the state of Louisiana. Now, I know there are different opinions on how to achieve these goals. That's why I intentionally made a broad call for this special session. If you want to cut spending further than I have proposed, show me where and who is impacted, and that's the very first item in the call. If you believe, as I do, that we should reduce contracts, that too is in the call. If you believe, as I do, that we should reduce statutory dedications, that's in the call. I don't claim to have the market cornered on good ideas to fix this budget. So please bring forth constructive ideas, not simple talking points. I have gone above and beyond to make this an inclusive process. So let's keep the conversations going. Don't simply back into your corners and dig in your heels. That is the very best way to ensure dysfunction and failure. But conversation must be now, and it must be accompanied by action. But I want you to just imagine the possibilities if we can walk away from this special session dispelling the notion that we are becoming just like Washington, D.C. Let's write a new headline in Louisiana, that we are able to work together to solve the greatest budget challenge to ever strike this state. And let's ignore the self-serving voices of candidates running for higher office. After all, that's what's got us into this mess. Instead, let's amplify the voices of the solution-driven leaders here who have the courage to actually solve our problems. As Louisianans, we've weathered many storms together, and this one will be no exception. As I said Thursday night, our best days are ahead. And just as we open this session in prayer today, I'm asking that all of us pray daily for our state and for our leaders, for you and for me. So God bless us all as we undertake this critical work. God bless the great state of Louisiana, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you. We have a tremendous challenge, and I believe we have a great opportunity to work together to solve those challenges. We don't have a lot of time, so there's a sense of urgency both with respect to the time that we have within which to work, but also the enormity of the challenge and how important it is that we get this right for the people of Louisiana. And I sense that the legislature is going to work with me in good faith to fix those challenges.
What kind of response have you had so far from talking to legislators up until now?
Well, look, there's been a growing acceptance of the enormity of the challenge. And before you get to Baton Rouge and actually see the numbers, it's sort of abstract. It's not real. Well, it is real, and so people are, I think, paying more attention to it now. They're taking it more seriously, and they're also having an opportunity to hear from more people who are affected by the current situation in Louisiana, but more importantly, by those people who will be adversely affected should we not raise the additional revenue and undertake these strategic cuts.
Are you concerned that as in years past, it can break down to the partisan bickering, that we can get the log jam again?
Well, I'm concerned that it could happen, but I'm committed to making sure it doesn't happen.
And how would you make sure it doesn't?
By working in good faith, doing everything that I just said. I don't have the market cornered on good ideas. I know that other people with good faith will have good ideas as well, and I'm committed to working with them so that we can get